The clock on the mantelpiece chimed midnight, its slow, sonorous toll reverberating through the silent manor. Rain hammered against the tall, leaded windows of Blackwood Hall, a tempest cloaking the night in sheets of grey. Inside the grand library, Lady Evelyn Blackwood's lifeless body slumped forward over the mahogany desk, one hand clutching a faded, cryptic note smeared with what looked like a mixture of ink and blood. The room was sealed tight, the heavy oak door locked from the inside, windows bolted shut, no sign of forced entry, no footprints on the thick carpet, and yet here lay Lady Evelyn, murdered in a chamber seemingly inaccessible to any intruder. Detective Harriet Wells stepped into the dimly lit room, her keen eyes sweeping every inch with meticulous precision. The scene was perplexing. The only furniture disturbed was the desk. The rest of the library was pristine, untouched. Her gaze fixed on the note, half crumpled and stained, resting in Evelyn's trembling fingers. The handwriting was frantic, almost illegible, but the few clear words sent a shiver down Harriet's spine. "The curse will end at dawn." The whispers around Blackwood Hall had begun long ago, an ancient family curse, a shadow that followed generations with a string of untimely deaths. Tonight, it seemed, the curse had claimed another victim. But what did the message mean? And why now? Why Evelyn? Harriet crouched to examine the body. There was no visible wound, no weapon in sight. The expression frozen on Evelyn's face was one of terror, eyes wide as if she'd seen a ghost moments before death. The forensics team would find no poison in her system, no sign of struggle. The cause of death was a riddle in itself, one that defied explanation. She rose and turned her attention to the room's details. A shattered glass lay beneath the desk, faint traces of something oily on the carpet, and an antique clock that had stopped exactly at 11:43 p.m. The housekeeper swore she'd heard nothing out of place, no footsteps, no screams. Yet the locked door and sealed windows argued otherwise. How could this be? Harriet's mind drifted to the family portraits lining the walls, their eyes seeming to follow her. The Blackwoods were a proud lineage, but one marked by tragedy and secrecy. The last known death had occurred a decade earlier, dismissed as an accident. But tonight's crime was too precise, too deliberate to be mere misfortune. She pocketed the note and moved toward the fireplace where a small bronze figurine lay half buried in the ashes, a miniature of a sphinx, oddly out of place in such a traditional English estate. The figurine was cold to the touch, but when Harriet turned it over, she found an inscription in Latin: "Vincit, qui se vincit." He conquers who conquers himself. A cryptic message in a cryptic crime. Outside, the storm raged on, hiding the secrets of the night as the detective prepared to unravel the threads tangled. Around Blackwood Hall, the impossible crime, the chilling note, the frozen clock, all pieces of a puzzle whose solution might lie buried deep in the shadows of the past. Harriet knew that solving this would not just require logic and skill, but an understanding of history, myth, and perhaps even the supernatural whispers that clung to the manor like cobwebs. As the first hints of dawn began to seep through the storm clouds, the curse awaited its reckoning. And so did Detective Harriet Wells. Detective Harriet Wells lingered in the shadowed corners of the library as the local constables bustled around, their movements brisk but mechanical, cataloguing evidence, photographing the scene, ticking off checklists that felt insufficient against the enigma at hand. She watched silently as Sergeant Collins approached, clipboard in hand, eyes flickering between the detective and the crime scene with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. "It's an impossible crime, Detective," Collins muttered, glancing toward the locked door. "No sign of forced entry, No footprints anywhere near the windows, no weapon. And the family swears no one entered or left all evening. We've searched everywhere. Harriet nodded, her mind still circling the strange details. Tell me about the people in the house tonight. Who was here? Collins recited the roster. The victim's younger brother, Edward Blackwood, the housekeeper, Mrs. Palmer, a distant cousin, Charles Wentworth, and a close friend of the family, Dr. Malcolm Haynes. Each had been accounted for, none seen near the library in the hour before Evelyn's death. Yet Harriet suspected the truth was more tangled. Her gaze shifted to the window ledge where a single, fresh footprint marred the dust. Not big, not deep, but distinct, a slipper or soft shoe, unlike the polished boots of the servants. She bent down and traced the edge with a gloved finger, then turned to the assembled household. "Whose footwear matches this?" she asked calmly. None of the faces betrayed any recognition. But as her eyes settled on Edward Blackwood, a flicker of unease crossed his usually composed features. He shifted his weight, clearing his throat. "Not mine, Detective," Edward said quickly. Harriet nodded but made a mental note. Sometimes the smallest detail cracked the biggest facade. Her eyes then caught something odd, a tiny smear on the edge of the grand piano in the adjoining room, faint but visible under the lamplight. It was a streak of deep red, but unlike blood, more viscous, sticky. She reached out, touched it with the tip of her finger, and recoiled slightly. It was wax, red, sealing wax, freshly melted. Curious, she moved to examine the piano's surface more closely, spotting the faint outline of a seal pressed into the wax. A family crest, she presumed. Why would sealing wax be melted here, away from any letter or document? Mrs. Palmer, the housekeeper, appeared behind her, face drawn and weary. "That wax? It's from the study," she said quietly. "Lady Evelyn had been sending letters earlier. She was nervous about something, said she had to break a family secret before it was too late." Harriet raised an eyebrow. "Do you know what the secret was?" "No," Mrs. Palmer admitted. But she looked frightened, kept glancing over her shoulder as if expecting someone. A sense of growing urgency settled over Harriet. This wasn't a simple murder. It was a desperate act, tangled in fear and hidden truths. Turning back to the room, she examined the antique clock again, noting how it had stopped precisely at 11:43 p.m. She glanced at the watch on her wrist, 1:15 a.m. 2 hours since the murder, and time seemed frozen in the moment it happened. She asked for the household members to be gathered in the sitting room. As they assembled, Edward stiff and guarded, Charles casual but watchful, Dr. Haynes calm and collected. Harriet studied their expressions. Deception hid in the eyes of some, but who? She started with Edward. "Where were you at 11:43? "In the drawing room, reading," he replied smoothly. "And who can confirm that?" "No one. I was alone." A classic setup, Harriet thought, but not definitive. She then turned to Charles. "Mr. Wentworth, what about you?" "I was in the kitchen," Charles said. "Mrs. Palmer can vouch for me." The housekeeper nodded. "Yes, he was helping me prepare for tomorrow's luncheon." Dr. Haynes met Harriet's gaze steadily. "I was in my room, preparing notes for an upcoming lecture, alone as well." Harriet noted the common theme. No witnesses to their whereabouts precisely at the time of death. Her eyes caught a subtle twitch in Charles's mouth, a nervous glance toward the door. "Mr. Wentworth," she pressed, "you seem uneasy. Is there something you're not telling us?" Charles straightened, voice clipped. "I have nothing to hide." Yet Harriet's instincts whispered otherwise. Then, as the tension thickened, the butler, Mr. Grayson, appeared, carrying a small wooden box. He hesitated before placing it carefully on the table. "Detective, this was found in Lady Evelyn's personal quarters. She kept it locked away, but I have the key." Harriet opened the box. Inside lay an assortment of papers, a few photographs, and a small, intricately carved amulet, strange in its design, resembling an ancient Egyptian scarab, its surface worn by time. She picked it up, feeling a chill run through her fingers. This was no ordinary keepsake, it had significance. One photograph caught her eye, a faded image of Lady Evelyn standing beside a man whose face was scratched out, replaced by a crude, inked symbol resembling a twisted serpent. Harriet's heart quickened. A secret affair? A family betrayal? The clues were deepening, but the picture remained murky. Turning to the group, she spoke with quiet authority. "Someone in this house knows more than they admit." The note in the library mentioned a curse, and Lady Evelyn believed it would end at dawn. We are running against time. Edward's composure cracked for a moment, a flicker of panic in his eyes. Charles shifted uneasily. "Doctor?" Haynes's jaw tightened, and Mrs. Palmer looked down, hands trembling. Harriet's mind raced. The pieces were coming together. Fear, hidden secrets, a locked room, a frozen clock, and an ancient amulet whispering of old family myths. But the full truth remained just out of reach, concealed beneath layers of deception and silence. Outside, the storm began to wane, the first pale light of dawn brushing the horizon. Harriet knew the answers she sought lay not just in the physical clues, but in the stories buried in Blackwood's past, and the shadows cast by those who wished to keep them hidden. The investigation had only just begun, but already the weight of the curse pressed heavily, urging her forward into the darkness before the dawn could break. The morning light seeped through heavy curtains as Detective Harriet Wells sat across from Edward Blackwood in the Manor's drawing room, its ornate furnishings a stark contrast to the tension simmering beneath the surface. Edward's fingers drummed nervously on the armrest, but his gaze remained fixed, almost defiantly, on Harriet. "I told you I was alone," he insisted. "Reading, trying to distract myself from the storm." Harriet studied him carefully. "You say no one can confirm your whereabouts at 11:43 p.m., but your footsteps were found near the library window. How do you explain that?" Edward's jaw tightened. I went to check the window earlier that evening. There was a draft, but that was hours before the murder." Harriet didn't believe him entirely. The slipper print was fresh, faint but precise. "Did you see Lady Evelyn after you checked the window?" "No," Edward replied quickly. "She was in the library, but I didn't speak to her." Harriet nodded slowly and jotted a few notes. She could feel the tension in the room coil tighter with every question. The thin veneer of civility barely concealed the fractures beneath. Next came Charles Wentworth, who lounged in a high-backed chair with an easy smile that failed to reach his eyes. "I'm afraid my alibi is solid, Detective. Mrs. Palmer was with me in the kitchen. You can ask her." Harriet glanced toward the housekeeper seated quietly nearby. Mrs. Palmer's face was pale but composed, though her hands clenched her apron tightly. "Mrs. Palmer?" Harriet prompted gently. "Can you confirm Mr. Wentworth's statement?" The housekeeper hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, he was helping me prepare for the luncheon, though I did see him leave the kitchen briefly around 10 o'clock. Charles's smile faltered, but he recovered swiftly. "A short walk to the garden. I needed fresh air." "Did you return to the kitchen after that?" "Yes." Harriet filed the information away. Every movement, every moment could unravel the truth. Dr. Malcolm Haynes was the last to be questioned. He appeared calm, his spectacles catching the light, as he spoke with deliberate precision. "I was in my study, writing notes for my upcoming lecture. Alone, as I said. Anyone who can verify that? Harriet asked. Unfortunately not, he admitted. I work late, usually by myself. She observed him closely. His eyes, steady and measured, betrayed no nervousness. Yet Harriet had learned to look beyond the surface. The detective's attention returned to the mysterious note found in Lady Evelyn's hand, the words about ending a curse at dawn. What curse, and who feared it most? Harriet requested to speak with Mrs. Palmer privately. The housekeeper led her down a dim hallway to a small, tidy room where the morning light barely penetrated. Mrs. Palmer, Harriet began, you said Lady Evelyn was frightened before her death. Did she mention anything specific? The woman nodded, voice barely a whisper. She spoke of an old family secret, something she wanted to reveal before it was too late. But she never told me exactly what. Did anyone else know about this secret? Mrs. Palmer shook her head. Not to my knowledge. But I've heard stories from the servants. Whispers about a curse tied to an ancient artifact, the amulet you found. Harriet leaned forward, intrigued. Do you know where that amulet came from? It was passed down through generations. Some say it belonged to an ancestor who dabbled in forbidden knowledge. The pieces started fitting together like fractured glass. Back in the drawing room, Harriet watched the household react as she subtly shifted her questioning. She mentioned the scratched-out face in the photograph and the serpent symbol inked in its place. Edward paled, fingers twitching. That was my father, he confessed. A man no one liked. There were rumors, dark rumors. Do you think he's connected to Lady Evelyn's death? Harriet pressed. Edward hesitated, then shook his head. Number, but his legacy haunts us all. Harriet sensed that while each suspect had a story, none were entirely truthful. The contradictions were small but telling. Edward's footsteps near the library, Charles's unexplained absence, the housekeeper's nervous glances, and Dr. Haynes's overly polished calm. Later, she discovered a torn piece of paper tucked inside the amulet's box, written in a shaky hand, "Trust no one." The curse feeds on lies. The investigation was no longer simply about a murder. It was a web of deception, each thread pulling her deeper into the Blackwood family's dark past. The voices around her whispered secrets and half-truths, but beneath them lay a silence far more dangerous. As Harriet prepared to confront the household again, the faintest crack of sunlight stretched across the floor, heralding the approach of dawn. And with it, the revelation that might shatter everything. The morning sun cast a pale light across the grand halls of Blackwood Manor, illuminating the fine dust that danced in the quiet air like the lingering remnants of a forgotten past. Detective Harriet Wells sat at the long oak dining table, a map of the manor spread before her, dotted with notes and photographs. Each room, each moment, each person connected in an intricate lattice she was just beginning to unravel. The suspects had been gathered again, each shadowed by their own secrets and half-truths, all tied together by a single, haunting question: who stood to gain the most from Lady Evelyn's death? Edward Blackwood, the bereaved younger brother, was first under the microscope. On the surface, his grief was palpable. His voice cracked when he spoke of his sister's untimely demise. Yet beneath that sorrow lurked a different kind of darkness. Harriet had learned from whispered conversations and carefully pried confidences that Edward's financial situation was precarious at best. Gambling debts had mounted in recent months, threatening to consume the last of his inheritance. Lady Evelyn, the estate's steward and guardian of the family fortune, had been the final barrier to his debts being settled by outside parties. If she were gone, The family assets might be vulnerable to claim. Harriet watched Edward carefully during their conversation. "So, your sister was your only obstacle to keeping Blackwood Hall intact?" Edward's eyes flickered, guarded. "I loved Evelyn. She was the family. But yes, I feared what would happen if the estate was sold off. The thought of losing everything scared me." Next was Charles Wentworth, the distant cousin whose charm seemed too practiced, too smooth to be genuine. His presence at Blackwood Hall was a mystery wrapped in polite smiles. Harriet discovered through subtle inquiries that Charles had long been envious of the Blackwood legacy, a lineage that elevated him by association but never fully embraced him. The Blackwood name opened doors, but only when he towed the line. "Jealousy," Harriet mused aloud. "That can be a powerful motive." Charles met her gaze without flinching. "I came here out of loyalty, not envy, but I'll admit, the family has not always been kind to me. I sought respect, perhaps a place where I belonged." Harriet was unconvinced. The recent appearance of Charles's name in several financial records, loans taken out under obscure circumstances, hinted at hidden desperation. Did he see Lady Evelyn as an obstacle to his ambitions, or perhaps a bargaining chip? Then there was Dr. Malcolm Haynes, whose calm intellect masked something more volatile beneath the surface. The family's physician and confidant, Haynes had access to more than just medical records. His close friendship with Lady Evelyn had been the subject of speculation, but Harriet found no evidence of impropriety. What she did uncover was a deep, philosophical disagreement between them. Lady Evelyn was intent on exposing family secrets, while Haynes warned of the chaos such revelations could unleash. Fear, Harriet thought. Fear of the past unraveling and dragging everyone down. Harriet's mind spun through the tangled web of motives, greed, jealousy, fear, and something else unspoken. Then she recalled the mysterious amulet, the scarab-shaped talisman that seemed to pulse with unspoken meaning. She called Mrs. Palmer aside again. "Tell me about that amulet. Why would Lady Evelyn keep such a thing locked away?" The housekeeper's eyes darkened. "It's said to be cursed, detective. An ancestor brought it back from Egypt, and ever since, misfortune has shadowed the Blackwoods. Lady Evelyn believed the curse was real, and that it was tied to secrets no one dared speak aloud." Harriet pondered the notion. The amulet was more than a trinket. It was a symbol of something deeper, perhaps a catalyst for the paranoia and mistrust festering in the household. As she sifted through alibis and overheard hushed conversations, Harriet noticed how tightly everyone's stories were woven together, each lie buttressing another. Edward's denial of being near the library at the time of death was contradicted by the footprint. Charles's alibi depended on Mrs. Palmer's memory, which wavered under subtle questioning. Dr. Haynes's solitary work was unverifiable, and Mrs. Palmer herself seemed to carry the weight of secrets she dared not voice. Harriet realized she was navigating a maze, with every path leading to dead ends and hidden traps. There was no single motive, no lone culprit. Instead, a confluence of desires and fears had created a perfect storm. Her eyes returned to the photograph with the scratched-out face, the inked serpent twisting in its place. The image haunted her. Who was this man, and what had he done to sow such discord? Had the sins of the past resurrected the curse that now threatened to consume them all? The torn note she'd found earlier, "Trust no one. The curse feeds on lies," seemed to echo through the halls, a warning that truth was both fragile and dangerous. Harriet decided to confront the family once more, to press harder, to peel back the layers of deception with unyielding resolve. She knew that unraveling the motive was key, that greed alone would not explain the frozen clock, the sealed room, or the amulet's silent menace. As the afternoon light waned, the house settled into an uneasy stillness, the shadows lengthening and the air thick with unspoken threats. Harriet's thoughts raced, pieces falling into place even as others remained stubbornly out of reach. In this maze of motives, one thing was certain. The curse was more than superstition. It was a force alive in the hearts of those within Blackwood Hall, binding them with secrets too dangerous to surface. And the detective was running out of time before the dawn's promise could turn into a reckoning none would survive. The evening drew its heavy curtains over Blackwood Manor as the household gathered in the dimly lit drawing room, the air thick with a mixture of relief and apprehension. The local constables were jubilant, their faces flushed with the pride of what they declared a swift and decisive resolution. The case, they said, was solved, yet Detective Harriet Wells remained unsettled, a shadow of doubt lingering beneath her calm exterior. The breakthrough had come suddenly, a confession, or so it seemed. Earlier that day, a torn scrap of fabric had been discovered, snagged on the corner of the library window latch, its threadbare weave matching a jacket known to belong to Charles Wentworth. Confronted with this tangible evidence, Charles had broken under questioning, admitting to a heated argument with Lady Evelyn that night. According to him, the dispute had been about family finances and old grievances, a clash of ambition and pride. "I lost my temper," Charles confessed in a voice strained by remorse. "But I swear I did not kill her. I left the library before anything happened." The authorities had seized upon the admission as the linchpin they needed. The case was closed. Charles Wentworth was the culprit, driven by greed and jealousy. Yet Harriet's instincts rebelled against the neatness of the conclusion. She replayed the night's events in her mind, the locked room, the stopped clock, frozen at 11:43 p.m., the cryptic note with its ominous promise of a curse ending at dawn. None of these pieces fit comfortably into the narrative Charles offered. As the constables celebrated, Harriet requested to examine Charles's belongings more closely. In a small pocket of his jacket beneath layers of fabric, she found a carefully folded letter, one Lady Evelyn had written but never sent. It spoke of fears deeper than financial disputes, of threats from within the family, and of a secret that could unravel them all. The letter ended abruptly with a warning. "Trust no one. The curse is not what it seems." Harriet's fingers trembled slightly as she folded the letter back. The story was far from over. She sought out Mrs. Palmer, who watched the unfolding drama with guarded eyes. "I feared this would happen," the housekeeper whispered. "Charles is angry, yes, but he is not the one who ended Lady Evelyn's life." "Who then?" Harriet asked. Mrs. Palmer hesitated, then said, "The real danger is closer than you think. The curse is a mask. The truth hides behind loyalty and love, twisted by fear." Harriet turned her attention to Edward Blackwood, whose grief seemed genuine, but whose desperation was undeniable. She observed how he avoided her gaze during questioning and how his footsteps near the library could not be explained away. But without concrete evidence, accusing him remained dangerous. Then there was Dr. Malcolm Haines, whose calm demeanor and seemingly airtight alibi left little room for suspicion, yet whose presence in the house at that critical hour remained a mystery. Haunted by these inconsistencies, Harriet decided to retrace the crime scene herself. Alone in the library, she examined every detail. The shattered glass beneath the desk, the strange wax seal on the piano, the frozen clock, and the cryptic note. The room whispered secrets she was only beginning to hear. Suddenly a faint noise startled her, a soft shuffle from the adjacent room. She moved cautiously toward the door, hand poised to push it open, but paused when a shadow flickered just beyond the threshold. The moment passed, leaving only the echo of her own breath. She knew the killer was still here, concealed beneath false confessions and misplaced evidence. The curse was far from broken. The night deepened, and with it, the mystery grew darker. Harriet was certain of one thing: the false victory proclaimed by the authorities was nothing but a veil, concealing a predator lurking in the shadows, waiting patiently for the next move. The real reckoning was yet to come. The first light of dawn seeped reluctantly through the heavy curtains of Blackwood Manor, casting long, ghostly shadows across the worn carpets and ornate furnishings. Detective Harriet Wells sat by the hearth, a collection of old case files spread before her, their yellowed pages whispering secrets long buried. The Manor's secrets, she was beginning to realize, stretched far beyond the night of Lady Evelyn's death. In the silence, Harriet's eyes caught a faded newspaper clipping tucked between the pages of a forgotten ledger, an article about a suspicious fire at the neighboring estate, Ashcombe Hall, nearly 20 years ago. The headline read, "Tragedy at Ashcombe. A family destroyed, a mystery unsolved." The article detailed the destruction of the Ashcombe estate, a fire that claimed 2 lives and left the family name tarnished. Among the victims was a man named Robert Wentworth, described as the patriarch's heir, and a man whose ambition rivaled that of the Blackwoods. But the circumstances of the fire were murky, with rumours swirling about insurance fraud, betrayal, and a secret feud with the Blackwood family. Harriet's fingers traced the name Wentworth, the same surname as Charles Wentworth, the distant cousin currently under suspicion. Was there a deeper connection, one that tied the 2 families and fueled the animosity simmering beneath their polite facades? She pulled out a ledger from Blackwood's archives, dusty and forgotten. Among the entries was a cryptic notation referencing a loan taken by Edward Blackwood from a W. Wentworth. An odd coincidence or a deliberate link? Harriet's mind pieced together a lineage of intertwined destinies, where past grievances fed present fears. Seeking clarity, Harriet summoned Charles and Edward once more, this time together. The atmosphere was taut as the 2 men exchanged guarded glances, their shared history more palpable than before. "Mr. Wentworth," Harriet began, "what was your relationship to the Ashcombe family?" Charles's posture stiffened. "They were my kin, my father's side. The fire destroyed more than a home. It destroyed my family's future." "And the Blackwoods?" "A rivalry that lasted generations," Charles said bitterly. "Accusations, debts, and blame. Many believed the fire was no accident." Edward's voice cut in, defensive. "Those were long before my time. We have no quarrel with the Wentworths now." But Harriet noted the sharp edge in his tone. Pressing further, Harriet revealed her discovery of the loan, Edward's debts tied to a Wentworth. The room fell silent, the weight of unspoken truths heavy. Charles sighed. "Yes, I helped Edward, but it was an attempt to keep the family from ruin, not a scheme." The detective's eyes narrowed. "Then why the secrecy? Why the lies?" As they spoke, Harriet uncovered another thread. Dr. Malcolm Haynes had once been a legal advisor to both families, a shadowy figure who had brokered uneasy truces and kept dark secrets buried. His presence in Blackwood Hall was no accident. The revelation cast new light on his calm demeanor and guarded answers. Harriet realized that Lady Evelyn's death was not just a tragedy of the present, but a culmination of decades of betrayal, debt, and bitter enmity. The curse that haunted Blackwood Manor was entwined with the sins of the past, its shadow stretching across generations. In the quiet moments that followed, Harriet stood by the window, gazing at the sprawling estate. The past was no longer a distant memory. It was a living, breathing force, one that demanded reckoning. The detective knew that to break the curse, she would have to confront the tangled web of history binding the Blackwoods, the Wentworths, and the secrets Dr. Haynes had guarded so closely. The shadows of the past were stirring, and the truth was ready to emerge from the darkness. The heavy silence that hung over Blackwood Manor was suddenly broken, not by confession or outburst, but by an unexpected challenge set forth by Detective Harriet Wells. She had spent hours sifting through tangled motives and whispered secrets, but it was clear the truth remained stubbornly hidden behind polished lies. Conventional questioning had drawn blanks, alibis had been rehearsed, and half-truths carefully woven into the fabric of the household's fragile calm. Harriet knew she had to try something different, something subtle but incisive. A test not of facts, but of character and instinct. Gathering the household once more in the dimly lit drawing room, Harriet laid out an old box she had found tucked away in Lady Evelyn's study. The box was simple but curious, a wooden puzzle chest, its surface carved with intricate geometric patterns and ancient symbols, the kind that teased the mind and demanded patience. Lady Evelyn's handwriting was scrawled on a small note attached. "Solve the puzzle, and you'll find the truth." Harriet's voice was calm as she explained the game. "Each of you will take turns attempting to open the chest. It requires careful manipulation and attention to detail, but more importantly, it requires honesty and patience." One by one, the suspects approached. Edward tried first, his fingers brushing the carvings nervously, but with impatience. After several failed attempts, he pushed the box aside with a frustrated sigh. Charles went next, methodical but rushed, his brow furrowed in concentration. He seemed more interested in the result than the process and gave up after a few moments. Mrs. Palmer handled the box with quiet reverence, her movements slow and deliberate. The room softened as she turned it over, but after a few minutes, she too admitted defeat. Finally, it was Dr. Malcolm Haynes's turn. He regarded the puzzle thoughtfully, his sharp eyes reflecting a flicker of something Harriet hadn't seen before, an undercurrent of hesitation. As Haynes carefully manipulated the intricate locks and sliders, Harriet watched closely. The tension in his face tightened, and his hands trembled ever so slightly, betraying a crack in his composed exterior. After a tense minute, a faint click echoed, and the chest creaked open, revealing a folded parchment inside. The doctor's face paled as Harriet unfolded the note. It was a letter from Lady Evelyn, written days before her death, addressed directly to Haynes. In it, she accused him of betraying the family's trust, of manipulating events and silencing those who threatened to expose truths he wished to bury. The room held its breath. Harriet's gaze sharpened. "Doctor," Haynes, care to explain why Lady Evelyn believed you were involved in a conspiracy against her? Haynes swallowed hard, his calm veneer cracking just enough to reveal a flicker of panic. "You don't understand. I tried to protect the family from destruction, from scandal. Sometimes difficult choices must be made." "But not murder," Harriet countered quietly. His eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape that wasn't there. The test had worked. The puzzle chest, a seemingly harmless object, had unnerved the doctor, peeling back layers of control and revealing a weakness in his facade. The subtle tremor in his hands, the hesitation before opening the chest, all betrayed a man burdened with secrets heavier than he had let on. As the household looked on, tension thickening the air, Harriet pressed forward. The chest was more than a game. It was a mirror reflecting true character, and in that reflection the truth began to emerge. The real threat had been hiding in plain sight, cloaked in calm rationality and trusted friendship. And now, at last, the shadows guarding it had begun to crumble. The air inside Blackwood Manor had thickened with tension, ever since Dr. Haynes's trembling hands had unlocked the puzzle chest and revealed Lady Evelyn's damning letter. Harriet Wells felt the investigation pulse forward, the pieces clicking into place in ways that promised to expose the killer. But in that moment of rising clarity, the fragile web of truth began to unravel in the most unexpected and alarming way. As the detective prepared to examine the letter more thoroughly, a sudden commotion erupted from the study. Harriet dashed through the long corridor, heart pounding, to find the door ajar, its lock smashed, and the room in disarray. Papers were scattered across the floor, drawers yanked open, and the faint, acrid smell of burned parchment hung in the air. Her eyes immediately searched the remnants on the desk. The letter, the key piece of evidence linking Dr. Haynes to a sinister conspiracy, was gone. "Someone's destroyed the letter," Mrs. Palmer gasped, clutching at her chest. Harriet's mind raced. The destruction was not accidental. It was a deliberate act of sabotage aimed at burying the truth. But who among the household had the knowledge, access, and motive to carry out such a brazen move? She called the household together in the drawing room once more. Faces pale, eyes wide, each person seemed to shrink under the weight of suspicion. The carefully constructed alliances and alibis now wavered, dissolving into a fog of mistrust. "I need to know who was in the study this afternoon," Harriet demanded. "Who could have had the opportunity to tamper with evidence?" Edward shifted uneasily, avoiding her gaze. "I was in the garden." Charles hesitated, then said, "I passed the study briefly but didn't go inside." Mrs. Palmer looked away, fingers trembling. "I was preparing dinner in the kitchen." Dr. Haynes's composure snapped just slightly. "I was in my room, but I admit I left it briefly to retrieve some books." Harriet noted the subtle discrepancies, the vague timing, the reluctance to be precise. Then, as she paced the room, a glint caught her eye, something small and metallic peeking from beneath a heavy curtain. She bent down and retrieved a torn corner of the missing letter, partially burnt, but still bearing legible words. "Need the truth will destroy." The partial fragment confirmed that the evidence had been handled with intent, and that someone had tried to eliminate the proof before it could see the light of day. Harriet's mind reeled as she pieced together the implications. The very walls of Blackwood Manor were closing in on her, the killer, or their accomplice, tightening their grip and silencing those who dared to seek the truth. Trust became a fragile commodity in the manor. Friends looked at one another with wary eyes, and every whispered conversation held the threat of betrayal. Harriet knew the stakes had risen. The race against time was no longer just about solving a murder, it was about survival. Whoever sought to erase the evidence was desperate and dangerous, and they were still here, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. The detective's resolve hardened. She would not be deterred. The vanishing evidence was a challenge, a warning, but it was also a beacon, illuminating the path to the heart of the curse. As the storm clouds outside finally broke and the first rays of dawn streamed into the manor, Harriet prepared to confront the darkness within, determined to expose the truth no matter the cost. The fragile calm that had settled over Blackwood Manor was shattered just as dawn's pale light crept through the tall windows. Harriet Wells sat reviewing the charred remnants of Lady Evelyn's letter when a sudden, piercing scream echoed from the upper floors. Her heart pounded as she bolted from the drawing room, sprinting up the grand staircase 2 steps at a time. At the end of the hallway, outside the guest chambers, she found Mrs. Palmer trembling by the door, her face pale and eyes wide with terror. "It's Edward," the housekeeper stammered. "He's gone, disappeared. His room, it's empty. No sign of struggle, but he's just vanished." Harriet's mind raced. Edward's disappearance was no mere flight of grief. It was a calculated move by someone still pulling strings in the shadows. The stakes had suddenly leapt beyond solving one murder. Now she faced the urgent task of preventing another. Rushing inside Edward's room, Harriet noted the signs of a hurried departure: an overturned chair, a half-packed bag, and a scrap of paper pinned beneath the desk leg. She picked it up carefully. It was a hastily scribbled note. "The curse is not over. You are next." A cold shiver ran down her spine. The killer was taunting her, revealing that their grip on the household was tighter than anyone had suspected. They were not finished. Harriet summoned the remaining household members. Charles and Dr. Haynes appeared shaken, exchanging wary glances. Mrs. Palmer fought to maintain composure, though her hands shook visibly. "Edward's disappearance changes everything," Harriet said, voice steady but urgent. "We must assume he's in danger, or worse. The killer is still here, watching, waiting. We're no longer just investigating a crime. We're trying to stop another." Questions raced through her mind. Had Edward been silenced before he could reveal the full truth? Was his flight genuine, or a trap designed to lure someone else into the open? As the storm outside finally broke, washing the manor's grounds with cold rain, Harriet secured the perimeter. No one was to leave until Edward was found, or the killer revealed themselves. Her instincts screamed that time was slipping away. The locked rooms, the frozen clock, the vanished evidence, all were pieces of a deadly game she was still trying to understand. Later, while examining the note once more, Harriet's sharp eyes caught a faint watermark embedded in the paper, a family crest twisted with a serpent entwined around a dagger. It was a symbol she hadn't noticed before, one linking the note directly to a secret society rumored to have existed within the Blackwood lineage. The investigation had taken a dark and unexpected turn. The villain was several steps ahead, weaving a web not just of murder but of terror and manipulation. Harriet's resolve hardened. She would not be baited or broken. The next move belonged to her. In the growing storm, with shadows closing in tighter than ever, the detective prepared to delve deeper into the darkness, to protect the innocent, unmask the villain, and finally end the curse that had haunted Blackwood Manor for generations. Even as the storm raged outside Blackwood Manor, Detective Harriet Wells stood in the dim light of the study, piecing together a puzzle that had long seemed without edges. The disappearance of Edward had shaken the household, but Harriet was certain that beneath the chaos, a pattern was beginning to emerge, a hidden rhythm connecting the scattered fragments of deceit, fear, and betrayal. She paced slowly, eyes scanning the room. The charred remains of Lady Evelyn's letter lay on the desk, alongside the shattered clock that had stopped at 11:43 p.m., the precise moment of her death. The puzzle chest still sat unopened on a side table, a silent witness to the secrets locked within. Her mind replayed every interaction, every subtle hint the suspects had inadvertently offered. Then it struck her the detail no one had considered significant, the peculiar habit of Dr. Haynes, who always wore a pair of thin leather gloves, even indoors, and never touched any object directly. She recalled how, during the questioning, he hesitated before opening the puzzle chest, his hands trembling beneath the gloves. Harriet walked over to the fireplace mantel, where an ornate silver letter opener rested. She picked it up carefully, noting the faint fingerprints smudged near the handle. Too faint to belong to anyone, but someone cautious or practiced at covering their tracks. The letter opener was missing from the desk where it should have been, the place where Lady Evelyn had been found. Her eyes narrowed as she connected the dots. The letter opener was a perfect weapon, small, sharp, and easily concealed. If Lady Evelyn had been stabbed, the weapon would likely be hidden nearby, disguised as an everyday object. Further, the serpent-etched watermark on the threatening note suggested a connection to the secret society rumoured to haunt the Blackwood lineage. Who else had access to the manor's most intimate corners and knowledge of its oldest secrets? Harriet turned back to the suspects, recalling small contradictions. Edward's denial of the footprint near the library, Charles's shaky kitchen alibi, Mrs. Palmer's trembling hands, and now Dr. Haynes's glove-wearing and nervous behaviour. Her suspicions converged on the doctor, whose calm exterior concealed a turbulent mind and possibly a dark past, entwined with the family's ancient curse. She searched the study once more, this time under the flickering candlelight, and discovered a hidden compartment in the desk drawer. Inside lay a bundle of letters, correspondence between Dr. Haynes and a mysterious correspondent, warning of exposure and betrayal. One letter stood out, written in Lady Evelyn's hand, imploring Haynes to cease his interference or face ruin. The pattern was clear. Haynes had motive, means, and opportunity. Yet Harriet knew better than to jump to conclusions. The puzzle was far from solved, but now the pieces fit together more coherently than ever before. As dawn approached, Harriet prepared to confront Dr. Haynes, confident that the elusive truth was finally within reach. The key to the case, hidden in plain sight, was the doctor's own carefully guarded habits and the shadows he tried desperately to hide behind. The curse that had gripped Blackwood Manor for generations was unraveling at last, thread by delicate thread. Harriet Wells sat alone in the quiet study, the weight of the case pressing heavily on her mind as the first rays of dawn filtered through the windows. The tangled web of deceit she'd been unraveling now pointed toward one man, Dr. Malcolm Haynes. But what haunted her most was the question of why, a motive deeper and darker than mere greed or jealousy. She had confronted Haynes earlier, watching the subtle shifts in his expression as she laid out the evidence, the torn letter, the secret correspondence, the gloves, and the vanished amulet. He had remained outwardly composed, but the cracks in his calm facade had become increasingly apparent. Now, alone with her thoughts, Harriet sifted through what she had learned about Haynes, the respected family physician, the trusted confidant, and the silent observer of Blackwood's darkest secrets. It was not money that had driven him. His modest lifestyle and steady income spoke against such a theory. Nor was it simple revenge, for though his letters hinted at betrayal, the nature of that betrayal was obscure. Then she found it, an old diary hidden beneath a loose floorboard in Haynes's private quarters. The brittle pages told a story of obsession, a man consumed by the need to protect the Blackwood legacy, but also tormented by a growing madness born of guilt and fear. Haynes wrote of a pact made long ago, a vow to guard the family from ruin at any cost, even if it meant crossing lines no one else dared approach. He believed the amulet carried a curse, a dark force that corrupted the bloodline, and that Lady Evelyn's reckless desire to expose the family's secrets threatened to unleash chaos. In one chilling entry, Haynes described his growing paranoia, convinced that the curse was real and that only through extreme measures could he keep the family and himself safe. Harriet felt a shiver as she read the words. Sacrifice is necessary. The truth is a poison. To save them, I must be the darkness they fear. She understood now. The murder was not just a crime, but a twisted act of protection. Haynes saw himself as a guardian, willing to kill to shield the family from the consequences of exposure. When confronted with the diary, Haynes did not deny the motives, but embraced them with a haunted resignation. I did what I had to do, he said quietly, The curse is real. Evelyn was tearing us apart. If the family fell, so would I. The depth of his conviction was terrifying. A man lost in a labyrinth of delusion and duty, willing to sacrifice everything to uphold a legacy he believed was under siege. Harriet felt a profound sadness tempered by steely resolve. The case was no longer about justice alone, but about healing wounds inflicted by secrets and fear. As Haynes was taken into custody, the manor seemed to exhale, the heavy shadows retreating just enough to allow a fragile dawn of truth. The curse that had haunted Blackwood was broken, not by ancient magic, but by the courage to face the darkness within. And as Harriet stepped out into the crisp morning air, she knew that some mysteries were never truly solved, but only understood, and that sometimes the greatest villain was the human heart itself. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the grand hall of Blackwood Manor as Detective Harriet Wells prepared for the final confrontation. The air was thick with anticipation. Every creak of the ancient floorboards seemed amplified in the tense silence. She had meticulously pieced together the puzzle, the motives, the secrets, the subtle slips that had revealed Dr. Malcolm Haynes as the man behind the murder, and the chaos that followed. Harriet had arranged for all the key players to be gathered in the drawing room under the pretense of discussing new developments in the investigation. The room was heavy with unspoken suspicion and weary exhaustion. Haynes sat quietly by the fireplace, his once impeccable composure now strained, a thin sheen of sweat betraying his anxiety. The others, Edward, Charles, Mrs. Palmer, watched cautiously, sensing that the truth was poised to break through the fragile veil. Harriet began calmly, her voice steady but firm. "Doctor." "Haynes, we've come a long way since the night Lady Evelyn was found dead. You've maintained your innocence, but the evidence tells a different story." Haynes's eyes flickered, a mixture of fear and defiance. "You have nothing that proves I'm guilty." She held up the torn letter from Lady Evelyn, the same note he had tried so hard to destroy. "This letter accuses you of betrayal. The puzzle chest, the correspondence, the gloves. You've tried to hide these pieces, but they don't lie." Haynes' breathing quickened, and he rose slowly, hands trembling. "You don't understand the burden I carried, the curse that has haunted my family and this house for generations. I did what I had to do to protect them." Harriet's gaze was unwavering. "Protecting your family doesn't justify murder. Lady Evelyn wanted the truth to come out, to free you all from fear and deception." Haynes shook his head, desperation creeping into his voice. "The truth would have destroyed everything. I was the only one strong enough to stop it." Suddenly, with a sharp movement, Haynes reached inside his coat, producing a small vial. The room gasped as he threatened to swallow its deadly contents. Harriet acted instantly, stepping forward and speaking with calm authority. "Put it down, Malcolm. This doesn't have to end this way." For a moment, Haynes hesitated, the vial trembling in his hand. Then, as if surrendering to the inevitable, he let it fall onto the floor, where it shattered. The tension broke, replaced by a heavy silence. Harriet motioned to the waiting constables, who stepped forward to restrain Haynes gently but firmly. As he was led away, his eyes met Harriet's, filled with a haunting mixture of regret and relief. The house seemed to exhale after the storm, the dark cloud of suspicion lifting. Harriet lingered for a moment, reflecting on the twisted path that had brought them here, the ancient curse, the tangled motives, and the fragile threads of truth. The case was closed, but the echoes of the past would linger in the walls of Blackwood Manor for years to come. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Harriet stepped outside into the cooling air, feeling the weight of justice balanced with the bittersweet knowledge that some scars never fully heal. As the echoes of Dr. Haynes's confession faded into the stillness of Blackwood Manor, Detective Harriet Wells allowed herself a rare moment of respite. The storm that had raged inside those ancient walls seemed to settle, the heavy curtains no longer veiling secrets, but simply shading the fading daylight. Justice appeared served, the murderer unmasked, and the curse quelled, at least so everyone believed. Yet Harriet's instincts, honed by years of chasing shadows and half-truths, whispered caution. Something gnawed at her, a loose thread tugging at the edges of the tapestry she had so carefully woven. She revisited the evidence, reviewing each detail with a meticulous care. And then, buried within the mundane, she found it, a subtle inconsistency, overlooked amid the turmoil. It was a letter, one previously dismissed as trivial correspondence. This note, penned in an unfamiliar hand, had been tucked away inside the false bottom of a drawer in Lady Evelyn's private chambers. The letter was unsigned, but its contents were chilling. A veiled threat referencing the heir who walks in shadow, and a warning that the true curse has yet to awaken. Harriet's mind raced. Who else knew of this secret heir? The line of the Blackwood family had been thought secure, yet the mention hinted at a concealed figure, someone with the motive and cunning to orchestrate a far deeper game. She summoned the household once more. The tension snapped instantly as eyes darted nervously and breaths caught in throats. "I have reason to believe that Dr. Haynes was not acting alone," Harriet announced. "There is a shadow behind the shadow, a puppeteer yet unseen." Charles Wentworth's face paled. Mrs. Palmer's hands clenched tightly. Even Edward's return, unannounced and silent, added to the charged atmosphere. Harriet fixed her gaze on Mrs. Palmer. "You have been a steadfast presence here, but your silence has concealed more than loyalty." The housekeeper's composure cracked, her voice barely a whisper. "I never wished harm, but there are truths so dangerous they must be buried." With gentle but unwavering pressure, Harriet pressed on until Mrs. Palmer confessed that she was the secret heir, a child born in secrecy and raised in the shadows of Blackwood Manor. Her motive was not mere inheritance, but a desperate desire to protect the family name from ruin and scandal. She had manipulated Dr. Haynes, guiding his actions and silencing threats that could expose her existence. The amulet, the curse, even the staged evidence had all been pieces of a grander design to control the narrative. The revelation sent shockwaves through the household. What had seemed like a straightforward case of obsession and murder was instead a labyrinth of deception, ambition, and desperate love twisted by fear. Harriet felt the familiar surge of both exhaustion and exhilaration. The true mastermind had been hidden in plain sight, the unassuming guardian of the manor's darkest secret. As Mrs. Palmer was taken into custody, the dawn broke anew over Blackwood Manor. The case, at last, was truly closed, but not without leaving behind scars that time might never fully heal. And as Harriet stepped into the fresh morning light, she knew one thing for certain. In the world of shadows and secrets, the final twist is never truly the last. The morning sun rose over Blackwood Manor with a deceptive calm, its golden light slipping through the towering windows as if to cleanse the dark deeds of the past days. Detective Harriet Wells stood in the quiet drawing room, the weight of the case settled but not entirely lifted from her shoulders. The manor's ancient walls had borne witness to secrets and lies, but today they would hear the final truth, or so it seemed. After the startling confession of Mrs. Palmer, the secret heir, and the unravelling of Dr. Haynes's role as a manipulated pawn, Harriet had expected closure. Yet as the household prepared to move forward, A nagging unease persisted within her, a silent warning that not all was as it appeared. She gathered the suspects one last time, her voice steady as she outlined the hidden clues, the subtle fingerprints on the letter opener, the faint scent of a rare cologne lingering in the library, the carefully concealed footprints in the garden, and the pattern of deception woven through the family's tangled history. All these pieces point to a truth deeper than any single motive, Harriet explained, eyes sweeping the room. Mrs. Palmer's secret was the key to unlocking the mystery, but she was not the final player in this game. A hush fell, the air thick with anticipation. Someone else used the curse, the legend, and the shadows to hide their actions. They manipulated fears and loyalties, hiding behind others while pulling strings unseen. All eyes turned slowly toward Edward Blackwood, whose pale face betrayed a simmering desperation beneath the veneer of grief. Harriet continued, Edward's debts, his sudden disappearance, and the vague alibis were designed to mislead. But the torn fabric near the library and the mismatched footprints were never his. Edward's breath caught as Harriet stepped closer, voice low but unyielding. The real villain understood the curse's power and used it to cloak their true intent, to gain control of the family fortune by destroying those who stood in their way. The room seemed to tilt as Harriet revealed Edward's clandestine meetings with unknown creditors and his attempts to coerce family members into silence. His role as the mastermind behind the chaos came into sharp focus, a desperate man driven not just by money, but by the crushing fear of losing everything. Faced with the undeniable truth, Edward's resolve broke. In a last frantic act, he lunged toward a hidden drawer, producing a small vial of poison, intending to end his torment on his own terms. Harriet was quicker, stepping aside and signaling to the constables who restrained him before any harm was done. As Edward was led away, a heavy silence settled over the manor. Justice served, yet a chill lingered in the air. Harriet turned to the remaining family members, her gaze softening. This case has shown us that the darkest curses are often those born in the human heart: greed, fear, and betrayal. She paused, eyes meeting theirs. But the truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of emerging. It's our duty to face it, no matter the cost. Outside, the sun climbed higher, washing away the long shadows but leaving scars that time alone could not heal. Harriet stepped into the fresh air, the case closed, but its lessons etched forever in her memory. The curse of Blackwood Manor was broken, not by magic, but by the relentless pursuit of truth. And as she walked away, she knew the world would always hold new mysteries, some darker, some lighter, but none that would escape the keen eyes of a detective, unwilling to let the shadows prevail. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm, amber glow over the sprawling grounds of Blackwood Manor as Detective Harriet Wells stepped onto the gravel driveway. The heavy burdens of the past weeks seemed to settle behind her, swallowed by the thick stone walls that had harbored so many secrets. The case, for all its twists and shadows, was closed, at least in the eyes of the law. Yet, as Harriet walked toward her waiting car, a nagging sensation tugged at the edges of her consciousness. The manor's mysteries had been laid bare, its darkest actors revealed and dealt with, but the faintest echo of doubt whispered beneath her thoughts. The truth, she knew, often lingered just beyond what the eye could see. Her fingers brushed the pocket where the folded scrap of parchment had been, one of the final clues uncovered, a note etched in Lady Evelyn's elegant hand. Trust no one beyond the veil. A cryptic message that had, until now, resisted full interpretation. Harriet's mind returned to the drawing room moments before Edward's arrest, when a subtle detail had caught her attention, but was dismissed in the whirlwind of revelations, a delicate silver locket lying untouched beneath the grand piano. It bore no inscription, yet it felt strangely out of place amidst the turmoil. She had examined it briefly, noting a faint engraving on its back, a symbol resembling a closed eye within a triangle, a mark neither of the Blackwood family nor of any known society connected to the curse. Something, Harriet realized, had been deliberately concealed. As the engine of her car hummed to life, she glanced back one last time at the manor, its tall windows reflecting the dying light. There was an unfinished story here, threads left dangling in the shadows. The curse might have been broken, but the house itself seemed to pulse with secrets still unspoken. Harriet settled into the driver's seat, determination hardening her resolve. There was a new mystery lurking beneath the surface, a challenge that called to her sharp mind and steady heart. And so, as Blackwood Manor faded into the distance, Detective Harriet Wells knew that the pursuit of truth was never truly over. Every solved case was but a prelude to another, every shadow hiding a deeper darkness. The mystery never ends, and Harriet was ready for whatever lay beyond the veil.